Some hours after continuing along the 45, Otto and Giles ran up against a sign, which was up a 1,000-foot tall sheer cliff. Otto lamented that he couldn't make out what the sign said, while Giles was busy just being amazed that Otto could see the sign at all. As the party looked around for anything that might give them an indication of what to do, Otto happened to glance down at the ground where he saw a picture. However, it was no ordinary picture, as it was a drawing of his imaginary friend Bobo, which Otto himself had drawn back in the jungles of West Africa. Naturally assuming that it was not a good omen, Otto burned the picture. As he did so, Bobo's eyes glowed red, and the party heard demonic chanting as Bobo disappeared into the flame. So anyway, after that happened, the party resumed their search for a way to proceed up the cliff, because of course that was what they wanted to do. While they gawked at the huge obstacle near them, a stranger slowly approached, carefully pointing his crossbow at them. He commanded them to introduce themselves and state their business after getting the drop on them. As the conversation went on, the man introduced himself as simply a ranger in the Order of the Were-Raven. He was out along the highway looking for a lost child named Adorotha. Otto suddenly became very enthusiastic about helping the man in his quest, in the hopes that he could join this cool-sounding ranger order. As the party tried to ask more, including how he got down the 1,000-foot sheer cliff, he interjected by saying, "No more questions," before riding off, humming "I Want It That Way" to himself. And so, with no better options in mind, the party decided that they would grapple hook up the 1,000-foot sheer cliff. As the party began their slow ascent up the cliff, they determined that Otto would climb first to set the pace and protect them from dangers. Irina would go in the middle, and Giles would go last in order to have the ability to catch Irina in case of an emergency. This proved to be a less than ideal strategy, as Giles spent the first half of the climb with a prime view up Irina's dress, causing a part of him to protrude from his body and scrape against the rocks of the cliff. In front of the party laid a path into a thick forest, and the party bravely walked in. As they cut and moved through the foliage, they began to approach a shack from which they could hear faint goat noises emanating. Upon sneaking in, they saw a girl who fit Adortha's description tied to a chair. She was flanked by 2 goats. The party briefly considered whether they were victims, kidnappers, or just goats. Giles called them kidnappers. I'll let that joke sink in for a second. Anyway, the girl attempted to warn the party that the goats were kidnappers. Oh hey, I was right. But before the party could move to attack, they transformed out of their wild shapes and into human form. They declared that they were kidnapping the child for the hags to use to make dream pastries. Since they clearly knew what dream pastries were, Giles and Otto made a peace offering of their own dream pastries to the druid. The druids happily took them and fell asleep, which allowed Giles and Otto to coup de grace them, avoiding the need for combat. Fortunately, finding the ranger outside, Otto and Giles handed over Adorotha to him in exchange for information about his Order of Were-Ravens. The ranger told the pair, but mostly Otto because he was super interested, to track down the leader of the order, Erwin Mardukov, at the Blue Water Inn in Vallaki. After bidding him farewell, the party departed toward Vallaki, eventually coming across a dilapidated windmill on a promontory, prompting the learning of a new word. Despite numerous warnings and ill omens, the pair approached to knock on the door. After a quick debate, it was determined Giles was the one who knocks. The party heard some terrifying sounds from within and braced themselves as the figure inside slowly opened the door to reveal their friend Morgantha, the hag from Barovia. After inviting them in, the party got down to business with Morgantha to discuss the possibility of a future partnership in honor of what would surely be the wishes of their missing friend Mbappe. As cracks and creaks and shrieks emanated from the floors above, The party cordially negotiated with Morgantha to sell 100 dream pastries in Vallaki in exchange for the chance to learn her recipe. And as the party departed from the windmill towards the town, they realized that they would probably need to consider how to sneak their drug supply through customs. As they came up with a plan, they continued walking down the road until they saw a familiar black man on the road ahead. It was Mbappe, who had returned to them. They ran up and greeted him, asking him what he was doing all the way out here, to which he responded, he was merely eating an apple. As the now reunited party traveled to Vallaki, they talked to Mbappe about what had happened in his time away with the mystery gang. As it turned out, Mbappe only made it to the entrance of Castle Ravenloft, but did not have the courage to go in. He lamented that they had more bravery than him. However, what he did not lament was that the party had come into pounds and pounds of illicit drugs, along with a deal to acquire the recipe from the hags to make more. So, all in all, it was an alright day for Mbappe. The group debated what to do with the dream pastries once they got to Vallaki, and eventually decided that the bottom line was every customer needs to leave with a smile on their face. Following some confusing interactions on the road with dead bodies, ancient family jewelry, and a sealed letter to Mbappe from his father that he refused to open, the party wound up at the iron gates of Vallaki. The party's arrival had coincided with the Wolf's Head Festival. Otto was instantly concerned about Doggo's safety upon hearing this. Things became more confusing when the party was handed a poster for the Festival of the Blazing Sun, which was to begin in 3 days' time. Evidently, this town just went from festival to festival. Not sure what to do with this information, the party stood in the town square with the pounds and pounds of illicit drugs that they had just remembered they had on them. Thankfully, there had been no customs upon entering Vallaki, or they'd have been screwed. First stopping at the post office, Mbappe attempted to return the letter from his father because it was surely incorrectly addressed as his father is dead. However, the postal worker challenged that assumption by noting that the letter was addressed to him and contained a picture of him that was wearing his clothes. And so, with great reluctance, Mbappe opened the letter and began to read.
My dearest Mbappe, I have always loved you, but I am afraid I am dying. The wolves of West Africa have finally attacked me and taken my leg, and now I am suffering from both blood loss and malaria. Oh, my dearest Mbappe, I love you so. I only have a short time to say to you my last will and testament, which I will write henceforth. Coming soon in this letter will be my last will and testament, if you simply continue to read on. Point number 1. I leave to you my home in the town of Ivory Coast, 345. Zip code 2137. A lovely villa on the coast of Ivory. But the stipulation is that you must never go to a place with mist. Also know that you will always have the spirit of Africa with you. Oh, my dearest Mbappe! If you ever find yourself fighting a vampire, remember to go for the heart, and do not eat any of his pork. If I am talking about penis, I did not intend it. Oh, my Mbappe! After you get this letter, please take care of your mother. She means so much. Why did you become a pirate? We never did approve of this. Anyway, this letter is over. Oh, Mbappe, I love you. Goodbye.
After reading the letter aloud, Mbappe thanked the postmaster, suggesting that he should become a therapist. The postmaster, concerned at the prospect of suffering through this interaction without making a sale, convinced Mbappe to send a letter in return. Mbappe agreed that it would be a good idea, and began to dictate, as he could not write.
My dearest Evelyn, this letter is being sent today upon the request of Father. In your highest regard, please be well. Sincerely, your infant,
He paused, and then decided.
That is the letter I would like to send.
At this point, desperate to get the party out of his store, the postmaster suggested that they look into visiting the Blue Water Inn for a place to stay and get information. The party arrived at the Blue Water Inn and spread out to take advantage of the whole scene. Mbappe asked about an outhouse, and as he prepared to go visit it, Irina politely interrupted the party to remind them that she existed and to let them know that she felt comfortable here and would remain. As she left to arrange a room at the inn, Otto and Giles moved up to the counter as Mbappe moved outside, off to the outhouse. Unfortunately, he did not make it to the outhouse in time and left a poop stain on his pants. Fortunately, Mbappe knew that he would not have to stand for that, as he had magical powers. He simply thunderous smited the stain away and... Oh. As Giles and Otto chatted up the bartender, they suddenly heard screams of shock and surprise from behind them. Turning around to see what caused the commotion, the party saw their friend Mbappe, freeballin' as the day he was born, casually striding up to the bar. After far too long, the bartender convinced Mbappe to at least use his turban to cover himself for the time being. It had become clear, through talking to the bartender, that the Baron was the person to see in town, but it was far too late, and Mbappe was far too naked to pay him a visit. Instead, the party decided to socialize at the bar, finding two well-dressed young men named Nikolai and Karl. Pleased at the party's ability to solve simple riddles, Nikolai and Karl suggested that the party visit their mother, should they really want to gain power or prestige in town. After the clock struck midnight, the party was greeted by a man who introduced himself as Erwin Mardikov, the leader of the Keepers of the Feather, an order of were-ravens. Otto was starstruck and asked to join their order. Erwin told the party that he would have to think further about letting them join the order proper, but at the very least, he recommended that the party earn some favor first by visiting the Wizard of Wine's winery to help discover what was happening to the wine shipments that had seemingly stopped. The following morning, the party went out to the Baron's manor to sell him their wares. The Baron was suspicious at first of the dream pastries, mostly due to Giles's complete inability to describe them without making them sound nefarious, and he demanded that Giles eat one first in order to show him. Giles quietly blessed himself and took a bite as Mbappe and Otto looked on in horror, thankfully without dropping dead right then and there. The Baron was satisfied and stated that he was ready to discuss price point, but Giles had Otto step in for that because although he was not dead, he was now tripping balls. As they were discussing prices, Adoratha ran up and hugged the party, explaining to her dad how she had met them in the forest when they rescued her. Now having opened up to the party a bit more, the Baron asked the party to do him a favor by looking into a family in town, the Vukters. He was sure that they were going to attempt to overthrow him at the Festival of the Blazing Sun, and so the party agreed to look into it for him. With the festival still days away, the party decided that they would take care of the Wizard of Wine's winery quest first. On the way out of town, they first needed to stop and get pants for Mbappe, who they remembered had just seen the Baron without wearing any pants. In search for pants, they stopped by a store owned by Gadolf Blinksy, and they were thoroughly creeped out by what they found inside, which were increasingly lifelike dolls depicting Irina and others such as Strahd himself. The party asked Blinksy to make pants for Mbappe, and he conjured up a beautiful pair of pants. But these were no ordinary pants, for he recalled every pair of pants he ever made, and each pair was unique. However, these pants were made with a raven feather, and that particular raven gave only one other feather for pants, and those pants are worn by Strahd. Finally ready to head out of town, the party decided instead to go to an alleyway and smoke the remaining 3 grams of weed they had before heading out. Following that, they got so high that they forgot to exit the city at all and instead headed to the Vokter house to introduce themselves. Upon arriving, they were greeted by a thin older woman. Correctly mentioning the party's prior association with Nikolai and Karl, she invited them inside. The party had a pleasant conversation with her in which she explained her views of the Baron and told the party that the town should be ruled by divine choice, not birthright. She also casually let it slip that she intended to overthrow the guards. Casting Cone of Silence, the party conferred with each other that although they were certainly not pro-Baron, they were also not pro-Strahd. They decided that perhaps it would be best to hold off on taking action, so Giles recalled the Cone of Silence, and the party bid Lady Fiona farewell, as they, actually this time, headed out of town. Well, actually, just kidding. They went to the boot store first in order to buy boots to avoid having to constantly make boot checks while walking on the dirt paths of Barovia. But then after that, then they headed straight out of town. After being accosted by wolves on the way to the winery, the party finally neared the Wizard of Wine's winery, only to be quickly ushered into the nearby woods by a strange man who was hiding there with his family. He began to explain the situation, but noticed that the party was in need of healing. The party politely refused the healing, offering instead to smoke what scant remaining dregs of weed they had with the man and his family. The man declined and began to describe the dangers, but the party would not hear it and began toking up. As the woods melted away around them, the party was met with a horrible sight of needle blights sprouting from the ground and seeming to run towards them. Desperately shaking out of their high, the party stood up and drew their weapons as the needle blights quickly approached. But the damage was done, and Giles was the first to pay the price for refusing the healing as the needle blights quickly downed him. Now surrounded, Otto and Mbappe had to desperately defend not just themselves, but Giles, and this strange other man and his family. But could they do it? This is where I would say, find out next time, but if I said that, that would imply that the party didn't just wipe right here. So instead, I'll fade to black and keep you in suspense.